Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, with information that has come out over the past week, one has to truly wonder if the AI race is not only over, but has also been a huge catalyst in helping to expose the insolvency of the West.
Yeah, absolutely. And we thought it was a good point to discuss this because of all the recent developments and really just to break it down and for everyone to understand why the attempts in the West are flawed in every way, shape, or form. And not least because they made the fatal mistake of saying, well, the way to succeed is to spend huge amounts of money and tell the world it's going to cost $500 billion and somehow we're going to raise all this money, although now no one seems to talk about that. And in fact, apparently where the money was coming from doesn't seem to be coming from there anymore. And then China came along and went, well, we've got a different solution and it's a fraction of the cost and the technology is available to all, and the world's going, well, that sounds like a plan. And we kind of like the idea that it's open source, and China's viewpoint is we're not here to make a killing for a select few. This We want AI to benefit the world, so not just the Chinese, but you know the global South, and by extension, for that matter, the Europeans and the United States, because we think AI should be a technology that is freely available. People can take our open source, they can make amendments to it and utilize it in a way that they feel will be beneficial to them, because at the end of the day, this should be a technology that is inclusive, not exclusive, is not there to make certain companies or individuals extremely rich to the detriment of everyone else. But when you start to break this down and look at it and assess where all the expenditure is, and from a US perspective, it is impossible to see how they can compete with China.
Yeah, one of the more fascinating things when you take a look at it, and it's really accelerated over the past week, which is why I laid it out with that. If anybody remembers when President Trump first came to office, he was bringing together business leaders and investors and such, and ChatGPT as well as SoftBank were one of the first who were going to put a huge investment into chips and AI and leading the way with this. And then, of course, just a few days ago, we find out that SoftBank has sold its stake in nvidia. So right there, they are getting out of the game. Now, whether that's a financial move or not, nvidia is still the poster child of the whole U.S. AI scheme. So, with that being said, you also have this interesting where a new data center that's been built can't even find a major client. So, nobody is prepared and ready to go ahead and use some of these data centers as well as, the infrastructure, the electricity, and all of the components that are necessary for it. We also have Barclays downgrading a company who's part of the AI system. So the financial wherewithal to be able to compete, all the promises are thrown out the window, and it looks like now even some of the entities are seeking either taxpayer bailout or taxpayer subsidies to try to grow their infrastructure.
Yeah, and when you start to break it down based on Western figures, this isn't Chinese figures, it's going to cost trillions. So, because you're going to build all these data centers, what's that going to cost? Probably a trillion, trillion and a half. Then you have all the capex, which is going to be hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Then you need all the semiconductor fabs, which is probably another trillion plus, including the price. So then you start to add it all up, and saying it's going to cost three, four, five, six, 8 trillion is not an exaggeration. And then the question everyone's going to ask is, well, who's paying for this? And you're absolutely right, Ken. There's already talk they're going to have subsidies, loans, credits, but who's ultimately paying for this? And of course, the great fear is somehow the US taxpayer is going to pay for this. And then, of course, the big question is the enormous energy requirements. US electricity demand is going to, well, if you base on the projections, is going to have to increase 25-30% in the next 5 years, just based on all the AI data centers and the whole industry surrounding AI. I mean, how are they going to meet that capacity? They can't as things stand. The one thing China can do is meet the capacity and at a fraction of the cost. So, I mean, the question is people can sit there and go, well, I want to put a data center in, but if you don't have the energy to power it, then it's useless. So you're going to have a lot of businesses who are going to be facing power constraints. I mean, and if you want, for example, gas turbines, the time to build them has more than doubled. I mean, and if you're going to end up with far higher energy bills, I mean, and there's also the big question about US oil and gas production and has shale peaked? I mean, in terms of expenditure on shale oil, it peaked in 2013. So you then start to make the assessment, well, where's the energy coming from? Is this why as well the United States is eyeing up places like Venezuela, for example, because they just simply don't have the capability to meet the energy demand. And the argument is AI is going to cause huge inflationary pressure in the US because electricity prices are going to go up 25-30%, maybe even more. And then if you add all these subsidies that they're going to put in for AI, what's the US debt going to be? It's 38 trillion now. What's it? 50 trillion? 60 trillion within 5 years? Probably. I mean, and if, there's this enormous expenditure and there's nothing to show for it, you know what's going to happen? They're going to go, well, we can't let this bubble go. Effectively, it'll have to be another too big to fail. So we're going to have to bankroll everything to make sure we don't have an AI bubble popping. And how much more is that going to cost? And that pushes the federal debt higher and higher and higher. I mean, and they can sit there and talk about all these ideas that AI is going to increase GDP growth by, 10, 15, 20%. Oh, is he sure it's not 50% or 10,000%? It's just ludicrous. And this is one of the big problems that the West faces. There's no understanding of where's the energy coming from to power, what's going to happen to energy costs, and who's going to fund all the expenditure required to put all these solutions in place. And at the end of the day, what's the output of this? And then as well, how's it going to impact existing job markets? Because if it decimates existing job market, where are the jobs for these people? And if there isn't any jobs, what are you going to do? Just have to have more subsidies, more bailing out people who lost their jobs through no fault of their own because you introduced technology. And at the end of the day, the question is, at what point does AI really do something of substance? I'm not knocking solutions that are out there now, but for me, they're nothing more than grandiose relational databases. Yes, that technology can improve and change with time, and I don't doubt it will. But this is an enormous expenditure, and I just think it's one of those things. On paper, it looks great, but it's right to be a bubble that will blow up, achieve nothing, and be the biggest capital destruction event that we've seen in human history, as things stand.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because in the past, one of the original quote unquote AI attempts that they did was something like Deep Blue. We're going to create a supercomputer that can think evolve and play chess against somebody. Well, okay. What kind of application is that? It looks good on paper, it makes for good headlines, but it really doesn't benefit in the long run the public. Now, in the introduction, I inferred that the AI race, for all intents and purposes, is over. And the reason I said this is because there was some commentary that came from the former CEO of Google, where in a conference he said this. I worry that most governments will use Chinese AI models. And the reason that he said this is that when it comes to cost, it's open source. The models are free. Most countries are going to adopt Chinese source models because they're cheap, inexpensive, and free. They don't have to build their own infrastructure. China is ready and willing, or it appears, to be able to subsidize all the infrastructure necessary, because they already have it, to have this open source for AI that will be beneficial to whatever allied friendly countries that they want. Now, when you take a look as well, some of the news coming out is that ByteDance unveiled China's most affordable AI coding agent. And you know how much they're charging? $1.30 USD a month, just $1.30. And this is, the TikTok owner a company. So when you take a look at this, not only is China trying to ask the question about, okay, AI is just another tool. How can it be beneficial to people as a whole? But also, how can it be beneficial to our allies? Where in the West, everything is about investment. It's about making money. It's about taking control. It's about seizing power. It's about making things bigger in the race. And China just, we saw this when they came out with DeepSeek. It just blew everybody away. Oh, yeah, we spent about $6 million. Here's DeepSeek. Oh, by the way, it seems to be better than everything that you've done so far, spending your umpteen billions
or trillions.
or trillions
But
at some certain point.
yeah, but for sure, if you look in the West, I mean, nvidia and I think openAI have said they think China's winning the AI race. Now, people may think that's just a way of forcing the Trump administration to pile more subsidies and into the industry to support them. But I mean, there's no doubt that I think these companies will ask for some kind of loan guarantees. In essence, a way of making sure that the industry is too big to fail because the amount of expenditure that's been will be invested in that, it warrants that. Otherwise, what happens if 5 trillion, $10 trillion is just vaporized? The consequences will be catastrophic. But China is already making huge inroads in Africa because of the nature of it being open source and it's very flexible, and countries are able to adapt that software to their own needs, and it's extremely cost effective for them to do so. But the one thing China has already, which is a massive advantage, is its electricity grid is already more than double the size of the United States, and it continues to grow hugely every year. So its electricity costs are less than half of those in the US. So if it has a large scale AI infrastructure and development, it's going to be significantly cheaper. So if you have software that you're not having to pay for, is very flexible, adaptable, and the Chinese will work with African countries to develop the software according to their needs. Who are they going to go with? The West or China? So China will just carve up the global South countries on site. Where's the marketplace for the Western technology? Western countries only? I mean, they end up getting a very small slice of the pie, so to speak. And you can see how, if the models continue the way they are, then China is going to take a dominant position in this regard because everything is works in their favor.
Yeah. So, Paul, were there any other thoughts you wanted to add regarding this?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to discuss is the fact that because of all the sanctions and measures to try and cripple Huawei and the Chinese access to semiconductors, China just keeps coming out with new technology all the time. And they're going to be able to deploy that in the world of AI. Because that was one of the things the US thought, well, we can actually scupper any hope they have of competing with us. Well, those dreams have long since gone. And this is a development that might not seem very obvious straight away, but basically they've just had this tech revolution in what might be termed analog computing. There's claims, and I can't substantiate this, of course, that this will be 1,000 times faster than NVIDIA chips to deal with AI technology. This came from the Peking University of China. So rather than using zeros and ones as the digital world does, the analog uh, device uses what's termed resistive memory arrays. So it stores data by changing the electrical resistance of materials between electrodes. Now, why is this relevant? Well, it only uses apparently 1% of energy as compared to a traditional GPU. So, Chinese claim they've overcome the problem with analog computing, which has always been an issue for since its inception. So, this technology allows data to be stored and processed in the same physical location, whereas digital chips, of course, have to move data back and forth between memory and the CPU. And therefore, the argument is that this is revolutionary. And who would have thought that a technology could exist that would have been revolutionary and it's analog? So the claim is that this analog chip could be a something that you would apply to post-more computing, where progress is defined not by transistors, but by far smarter architectures and lower energy footprints. So China's rolling these things out all the time. And this technological advancement would never have happened if the West or the United States had decided to try and cripple China technologically by trying to scupper Huawei, by trying to restrict their access to semiconductors. And it's just the old adage that necessity is the mother of invention. We've said this before, but China will continue to roll out technology. And at the end of the day, they will offer the complete solution. So they won't need to depend on the West. They won't need to depend on Nvidia in the future. Now, of course, that's very damaging for Nvidia, who could lose access to huge swathes of the world where China rolls out the technology needed to support all the AI developments, whether that's in Africa, Southeast Asia, or anywhere else for that matter. And that's why it's not unreasonable to suggest that the race to win AI is already over and China is the clear winner. Now, you can never say never, and maybe there is something that will come out in the future that will surprise us all. And I wouldn't dismiss it totally, but having said that, as things stand, it's going to be extremely difficult for Western companies to be able to compete with China. And if China takes a dominant position globally just by on the basis that global south is the vast bulk of the world's population and they're able to put in the technology to these continents, never mind countries, how is the West going to compete? Because where's it going to make the return on this enormous investment that will have cost, who knows, tens of trillions or eventually? And the answer is there is no way they can do so. So, already there has to be some serious questions asked in the West as to how much money are we prepared to invest in this and to be really serious that we can make this a going concern and become the technological revolution some people in the West think AI should be alone for the West, which of course is idiotic.
Yeah, one final point I'll make regarding this is if the U.S. thinks it's ahead of the game, then why did President Trump have to, in an interview a day or so ago, suddenly change his stance and say we need H-1B workers in here because Americans just can't cut it? So, enough said on that. Um,
Absolutely, but an extremely important point.
Indeed. To everybody here at the Sirius Report community, as always, thank you for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.